Okay. Good morning, and welcome to today's plenary. I hope that all of you are enjoying our sessions, are enjoying the activities of the conference thus far. We're here in the last day. We're on Tuesday, and we have a number of things going on today. Not only this session, we have the scholarship luncheon, the industry awards, and the APTA assembly. So I'd like to make sure that you attend those sessions and be very active in those things, and the panel sessions as well. So let's get started. And what I want to do is, again, thank you for being here today. I want to thank our plenary sponsors, Parsons and Jacobs. And what we'd like to do is have representatives from each entity come up and speak. We have Ken Wells from Parsons, and we have Davita Jenkins-Knight from Jacobs. And they're going to come up and address you for a couple minutes, and then we're going to get the panel started, okay? Look forward to it.
Good morning. I'm Ken Wells from Parsons. I was not prepared as a child for autonomous vehicles because George Jetson drove his own car. I also have to say that the research I've done on autonomous vehicles consists mostly of watching Total Recall and watching the Johnny Cabs, which scare me and make me concerned about cybersecurity with respect to autonomous vehicles. But here we are. I think the private industry has proven that regardless of the condition of our infrastructure, they can get something to work. So Parsons is involved in autonomous vehicles, 9 different programs throughout the U.S. right now, so it's going on everywhere. It is coming quickly and is going to be here to stay. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm looking forward to it myself, and I'll turn it back over.
And we have Davita coming up from Jacobs.
Good morning, COMTO. I'd first like to actually congratulate Brad Mims as the new CEO and president of COMTO. I'd also like to say a special thank you to the National Chair and the National Board of Directors for your tireless efforts. I'd also like to thank the Detroit chapter for hosting a fabulous conference. We've really enjoyed ourselves while we've been here. Jacobs has a long history of supporting COMTO and has been pleased to be a partner over the last 20 years. For those that may not know, the company was founded by Joseph Jacobs in 1947 and has grown to be one of the world's largest and most diverse engineering and construction companies. We provide a full spectrum of technical, professional, and field services for industrial, commercial, and government agencies. Services include consulting, construction management, procurement, engineering, operations and maintenance, and environmental remediation. Our fundamental business strategy is to build and maintain long client relationships, and we deeply value the relationships that we have been able to develop and nurture through our COMTO relationships over the years. I look forward to the upcoming panel on discussion about how technology is changing the world in which we know it today. I've enjoyed the conference. As Brad mentioned, would encourage each of you to continue to participate in the remaining sessions, and I wish you safe journeys as you return to your home destinations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Davita. Before we move on to the program itself, I'd like to do a point of privilege and recognize our board of directors. For the members of the board, can you just stand up so we can just recognize you? This is our board of directors. And if there are any members of the Council of Presidents who are here, can you raise your hands, take a stand for us as well? Our Council of Presidents. These are the guys who make it run, and make all of our our chapters run. So with that, let's bring Renee Pruitt, our moderator, to the stage, and then we're going to get our panel started. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Okay, so has everyone been enjoying themselves so far with the conference? Okay, good. That's great. I know I was at the museum last night for our official conference white party, and it seemed like everybody was really enjoying themselves, the historical exhibits, you know, the food, the refreshments, socializing, and the music, right? Yeah. I was listening to Kim say this morning that they did a last call for the bus leaving, coming back to the hotel 3 times before people actually left. So I think people were really enjoying themselves. In fact, Kim did an interview with Karen Dumas about COMTO conference coming to the city of Detroit. And she was explaining what COMTO was about and the CEU classes and some of the speakers who were actually going to be there. And Karen said, engineers and transportation people, Kim said that we were going to have the white party and stuff. And she says, engineers and transportation people, do they really party? And so Karen, the answer is yes, we do. Yes. So once again, good morning and welcome to our session on smart cities, autonomous and connected vehicles, which is truly the next frontier. We've already broached the topic at other sessions. I know this afternoon we'll also have some sessions, following this event, we'll also have some sessions on autonomous vehicles. At the Youth Symposium on Saturday, more than 100 students visited the Toyota Research Center and saw an autonomous vehicle demonstration. Yesterday, Secretary Slater mentioned that he remembers research being done on autonomous vehicles 20 years ago. Secretary Burnley told us that the technology is closer than we've ever known it to be before. Here in Detroit, they just announced, and I saw this on the news last night, that Navia, a European company, is moving to Saline, Michigan, which is about 25 miles from here, and they're building a plant. They're going to be building autonomous shuttles. They plan to build 50 of them by the end of the year. So, you know, that's more jobs for people in Detroit. We're always excited about that. And then yesterday, our very own director of MDOT, Kurt Steidel, mentioned that Michigan is leading the way in technology and the processes for managing that technology. So right now, billions and billions of dollars are being spent on autonomous vehicles. And I also heard a quote that said that 20 years from now, in our lifetime, the cars we drive today will be like using horses for transportation, if you can imagine. So we're going to put all of that in perspective right now. So I'm going to ask my 3 speakers to come up and take a seat. I'll introduce them. If we can, and if you'll see your name tags right here, because I've got it all arranged. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So first we have Mark DeLaverne, and he is the Chief of Mobility Innovation at the City of Detroit. The Office of Mobility Innovation is focused on making it easier for people to get around Detroit and supporting the growth of the mobility industry in the city. Welcome. Okay, thanks for being here. We also have Mr. Colin Cancel sitting to his right. Colin is the Intelligent Transportation Systems Program Manager for MDOT, and he's currently responsible for the administration, support, and oversight of the statewide information technology system, connected and autonomous vehicle program at MDOT. Thank you for being with us. And then finally, we have Andrew Smart, and he is the Chief Technical Officer for the American Center for Mobility. He's responsible for the overall design and delivery of the new automated and connected vehicle test facility and technical partnerships. And I think he's also going to be telling us about what the American Center for Mobility is actually doing about accelerating technical standards for the industry. So first, I'd just like to start out with asking each of our speakers to just tell us about the smart technology innovation that you're involved in advancing. And Mark, you want to get us started?
Sure. So I'll get started, but I'll be completely upfront with you that we are not at the same level as these two guys. So, but sure. So, if you're familiar with the city of Detroit, the city has some unique mobility challenges. We're the largest region in the country without regional transit. At the same time, you know, that really impacts a lot of our residents because about 70% of our residents work outside the city border. And so our bus system essentially stops at the city border, and the suburban bus system takes...
Can everybody hear him okay?
All right. Sorry.
Okay, I want to put the mic. Can you put the mic right in front of you?
Sure.
Okay.
We have three. Okay. So, you know, at the same time, you know, knowing that we have a number of challenges with regards to transit, we also have the highest car insurance for any city in the U.S. You know, for some people, it can cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year just to insure an automobile. And for people that are just getting by, that's a huge number. So we have a lot of things that we're focused on what we can you know, start to make improvements in people's lives today. But at the same time, you know, this is a unique opportunity, you know, with Detroit being here, with the opportunity of taking advantage of the resources at MDOT, the resources at the American Center for Mobility, as well as just all the companies and technical resources, as well as startups that are happening across the city and region. So what we're looking at is developing a program to essentially transform mobility here in the city and transform how people get around. And some of that is really basic stuff, from how we make impacts to making it easier for people to take transit, to beginning to integrate new types of technology, and whether those are connected technology with regards to traffic signals and V2I and V2V, to integrating autonomous vehicles. But we're really focused on, as we begin to make these integrations, and that we're not just doing it for technology's sake, right? We're trying to solve problems. Right. And for a lot of people in the city, like, no one's calling me up and emailing me asking me, you know, where's an autonomous vehicle in my neighborhood? You know, they're asking, why isn't the bus on time, right? And, you know, that's one of the big things that we have as a city, but I think also as a society, right, is how we begin to talk about these things, and how we begin to understand not just sort of how the technology will work in a city, but how a city will work with the technology. Because, you know, knowing that, you know, a lot of different, you know, new type transit services don't necessarily touch all parts of a city like Detroit or a city like Chicago or Los Angeles, you know, that these solutions need to work for everybody. You know, they're not just to work for a certain segment in a higher density location. We want these solutions to be open and available to everyone. So that's, you know, really where we're looking at is when we begin to integrate these technologies, how do they solve problems for everybody in Detroit?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, so I guess from an innovative technology perspective, I think Mark hit the nail on the head that when we're looking to invest in these technologies, we shouldn't be focusing on technology, I guess, finding a problem. There's plenty of problems out there that we can utilize this technology to solve. And from MDOT's perspective, I think when you look at our overall kind of goals, I think we're mainly focused on, you know, safety and reliability of our transportation network. So, you know, Mark touched on some of the technologies that we're looking at. It could be, you know, connectivity to signalize intersections to increase safety, for example. It could be looking at, you know, data that we could take advantage of to identify where we need to do better winter maintenance activities. But ultimately, when you look at how you apply the technology. It all needs to revolve around, from our perspective, safety is the #1 goal. I mean, if you are looking to, do something in this arena that solves congestion, ultimately it all ties back to safety, because you're reducing the number of secondary incidents, for example, that are, increased by congestion on our roadways. So I think the big thing, though, that we need to focus on when we're looking at connected and autonomous vehicles is making sure that, to a certain extent, we're staying out of the way of technology and allowing the private sector to advance, but at the same time, making sure that we're allowing it to be implemented in a safe manner and making sure that it's tested properly. So, from Michigan's perspective, we're investing in a lot of things. We're investing in vehicle to infrastructure types of technologies. From a state perspective, from a legal framework perspective, we're very open to allowing for autonomous vehicle, testing on our roadways. But in all instances, we got to make sure that, one, it's there to solve a problem, and two, it's done, safely. And so I think some of the things that Andy can touch on, is the fact that, to roll some of these technologies out to a real-world environment like the city of Detroit or, MDOT's roadway network, we need to have locations where we can test,
Right.
these types of technologies before it gets out there. So.
Right, and that really brings us to Andrew, who's at the American Center for Mobility, because they do have some test tracks out there.
What a segue, yes. So the American Center for Mobility is based in Ypsilanti, which is just to the west of Detroit. What we have there really has 4 main pillars. One, we're developing a proving ground specifically for connected and automated vehicles. If you look at traditional proving grounds, you're there to test a vehicle in some way, shape, or form. Performance, cooling, braking, ride and handling. But when we see connected and automated vehicles, it's not just the vehicle. It then becomes, how's the vehicle interfacing with whatever smart device? How's the vehicle interfacing with the infrastructure, the traffic light systems? How's the vehicle interfacing with non-motorized road users? So it's really the whole, and I hate to use the buzz phrase, ecosystem, but it's different. It's not just about the car. And because of that, you need basically a unique location to validate the technology before you can safely go out on the roads. And to validate it, you mean it can be repeatable, it can be measured, and that's the key at the moment, because it's not about you hear people talk about the millions of miles that have been driven in autonomous mode. I have a personal view, which is it's not the miles that matter. It's the number of scenarios you came into contact with. It's the amount of situations that vehicle had to deal with. It wasn't just putting miles on the vehicle. It's getting knowledge, it's getting the data. And it's then the time between the data, which are then terabytes per day, into some kind of learning mode. So in addition to the proving ground at ACM, another element that I think Renee will touch on is then, excuse me, education. Education not only for the engineering community, but also engineering for the general public. The general public, I think the gentleman from Parsons was saying about the Jetsons. Unfortunately, the millennials don't know who the Jetsons are. That's true. So we have to talk about things differently, but then we've also got to talk in a consistent manner, because there's a lot of confusion out there. So education, and as Renee quickly pointed out, if we can deploy voluntary standards and quickly, then that will help accelerating the deployment of the technology, which is all about safety and mobility, as both Mark and Colin mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So that's what we are going to be hitting on today, is all of your insights in the advances in mobile technology. For our audience out there, you are also going to learn how you can prepare for it, and then how it will be applied to highways, rail, ports, transit, and aviation. And there will be time for Q&A following our panel discussion. So, we're talking about automated and connected vehicles. They're not the same thing, right? Okay, so can you talk about the distinction, just to make sure that everybody understands exactly what we're talking about?
Well, there's
see,
automated.
Colin, I thought you would jump right on that.
Either way, it doesn't matter.
We'll tag team. There's connected and there's automated. You don't have to be automated to connected, and you don't have to be connected to be automated. Depends on the technology. A lot of it depends. From a connectivity perspective, you can be connected to other road users in terms of how to connect to vehicles in front, to DSRC, the dedicated short-range communication between vehicles and infrastructure. So that can just connect you and help. The automated features are then something really very different. They can use certain connectivity, looking into map data to help you out. So you can do, the two can be linked, and there's a lot of confusion between it. But there can be also autonomous driving, and there's also automated functions. So again, then you wonder why there's confusion. The automated functions, for example, emergency braking. To give a brand name, Subaru has they're called EyeSight. The unfortunate thing is, a lot of people have emergency braking, and every car company calls it something different. You wonder why there's even more confusion then. So that's just an automated feature. Then you come to autonomous driving, where you have defined levels between 0 and 5. And then you start wondering, well, what's the difference between a level 2 and level 3, a level 3 and 5? So it's really the level of autonomy, leading from basically there is no autonomy, 0, to 5, which is there are no pedals, there is no steering wheel. You get a seat, and it takes you where you want to go. So there are very different levels.
Yeah, so from Michigan DOT's perspective, we're mainly focusing on, from an infrastructure investment perspective, the connected piece. So the idea that there's value that you can provide through communications to the vehicle. So for example, I talked about signalized intersections earlier, and providing that data to allow for vehicles to more safely travel through an intersection. But there's a lot of situations, you know, on our roadways that connectivity and increased information and data can help not only the normal motorist through a connected sense, but then also the autonomous vehicle that could use that data as well. So for example, one location where we're trying to provide better data through connectivity are work zones. So, you know, work zones can be very problematic. You know, you drive up on one as a normal motorist, and the information you see is a changeable message sign on the side of the road that said, you know, work Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 5 p.m. Well, can't we provide better information to the motorists directly to them based upon their location to give them more relevant information? So for example, you know, what's the speed limit? Are there workers present? You know, what's the geometry of the work zone? But you think about, as a normal motorist, all that information is valuable. But then if you think about an autonomous vehicle, and being able to understand those conditions could be valuable as well. So from our perspective, we're really looking at how we can take, you know, information, real-time information in particular about our infrastructure, and tie that through communications directly to the vehicle. So that's when we're talking connected. That's what we mean from our perspective. But then there's one more piece of that, which is, you know, vehicles can now not only communicate with the infrastructure, but also with one another. So when you think about an autonomous vehicle and most of the things you see today, it's mainly based around sensor technology. So vehicles having a bunch of sensors knowing kind of 360 degrees what's going on around them. But if you add the connectivity piece, it adds redundancy, and then also it can allow for vehicles to communicate to one another about their location, speed, heading, things that also sensors can't see. So, you know, if a vehicle, you know, 3 ahead of you slam on their brakes, you're not going to see that, and the sensors aren't going to see that, but connectivity can allow for that vehicle to know instantaneously that something's occurring. So we feel that there's a lot of value in connectivity on top of the autonomous features that Andy had mentioned.
Because it's all about safety. Okay. So I understand that there are some autonomous vehicles out there on the street today, and there are some test locations out there. Any test locations here in Detroit, Mark?
So we're, you'll see vehicles, right? They're not testing in partnership with us because they're just going out and doing open street testing on themselves.
And that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, this is happening around the country. Like, it's not like this is like
Okay.
we're.
It's a free country. Right, okay.
And different states have different regulations, which Colin is now responsible for explaining to everyone on what they are. But Michigan, the state has been very supportive of this technology, and no one has to check in with me to say, like, I'm testing a vehicle on Jefferson Avenue today. Do you want to come look at it? Like, that does not exist. That said, we are working with companies to help them because this is different for them. For 100 years, right? Roads were built. You put vehicles on them, right? You knew what the road was built like. You sold a vehicle to a person, and then he drove them, and that, as an OEM, that was your responsibility. You were done. But now the conditions are they need to better understand how cities function, how suburbs function, and it's part of what's going to be happening at ACM. But part of it's just learning from people, right? And understanding like how our EMS vehicles pull over and what their standard operating procedures are when they have to make a stop, and how they have people out there. Because the vehicles can recognize people, but if an officer or an EMS person is directing traffic and does this, right, versus this, like, that's a big variation for the AI to recognize. So it's like there's lots of things that are out there that there's I don't know, we'll say 95% test cases, right, that you can sort of that exist in a lot of places, but there's a percentage out there that has a lot of variables that are either human variables or things that can't be in control of the vehicle, and that's what we're trying to work with companies is to help them learn so that we can learn as well, because this is obviously new to us, and what this technology means for things like fleet management to things like how we control the public right of way.
Because one of the things I mentioned is that there's billions and billions of dollars being spent on developing automated vehicles. And, just in my research, I understand in China, they're doing a lot of things with autonomous vehicles. They're doing a lot of things in California. We're leading here in Michigan, but the race is on, needless to say, in terms of automated technology. And the race is on to make sure that when the cars are out there on the road, excuse me, they're following standard protocol. And Andrew, I understand that that's really what ACM is focused on a great deal, is establishing the guidelines around, what does this mean, what does this mean, and how we're actually going to do this. Secretary Burnley mentioned yesterday that sometimes, you're just going to defer to the lawyers to decide some of this. So, you don't like that idea. So tell me why you like or you don't like that idea.
I went to engineering school, not law school. That's why. The development of standards is way behind where it normally is in developing automotive technology. Normally what happens is the technology is developed, standards are developed in conjunction with that, and behind the standards really comes regulation. What the regulators take is they take certain portions of these standards and they can integrate them into the regulation, and there's just a circle of life. But with autonomy, and as you say, Renee, the billions of dollars that are involved in this, people don't want to share their intellectual property very readily. And because of that, people have been very careful not to really spread the love too much. And in doing that, therefore, standards really have felt, how best to put it, they've been very much delayed. And so what we're doing at the American Center for Mobility is really trying to accelerate that. And you can do it through a number of ways. Voluntary standards are just that. They're not regulation, but the fact is you actually also have volunteers involved. So it's not their day job. They come along, work with 30 to 40 other engineers, develop the standards, and in their own time, when they get back to the office and high days, holidays, and weekends, they help develop the procedures. You can support them actually by having dedicated staff. You can accelerate something that may take 3 years down to 18 months, or something that takes 24 months down to 9 months. And in doing that, what we're also doing is bringing a proving ground into the mix as well. So you can actually do the testing while you're developing the standards. Again, this should then accelerate the deployment of the technology. So everything we're doing at the moment is to accelerate the deployment of the technology.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, so, you know, some of those standards that Andrew's talking about, particularly from a connectivity perspective, are extremely valuable from a DOT perspective because, for example, if we're going to take all this time and energy to collect all this information and all this real-time data about our infrastructure to broadcast, you know, to these vehicles to accept, if, you know, we're speaking English over here and, you know, the vehicles only can read Chinese, I don't know, bad analogy, but, you know, there's not a lot of value there. And so being able to make sure that, particularly from a connected vehicle perspective, the infrastructure owner operators and the vehicle manufacturers and the tier ones were all relying upon the same types of standards for communication. And then I did want to touch base real quick on the previous comment about our vehicles being tested in Michigan. So, I mean, we have law in place that allows for fully autonomous vehicle testing and operation at any time on our roadways since earlier. At any time since earlier this year. We have laws in place that allow for OEMs to have their own fleets of autonomous vehicles. We have laws in place that allow for autonomous vehicles to be connected to, you know, smartphone applications, for example, for ride-sharing services like the Lyfts of the world. So Michigan has a really welcoming legislative framework for allowing these technologies to be tested. And one of the things that's interesting is, you know, Michigan has a long-standing history of testing advanced vehicle technologies. And, you know, at any one time, there could be 40 to 50,000 manufacturers' plates that are out there where they could be testing whatever they like. So when you see a manufacturer's plate and you see all the gizmos on the vehicle, they're testing something along those lines.
So there are tests going on right now. There's a lot of autonomous vehicles out here on public streets. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, there are, and also collecting map data as well. So it's all about the sensors at the moment. If you have the vehicles out there, they're basically taking in the data. They may do this on a daily basis. As Colin mentioned about mobile work zones, they are a challenge because they're different. So they'll map on a daily basis just to get the refinement and the fidelity of those maps, because it's all about the positioning of the vehicle. So you know where you are within the lane. If the lanes change or what happens, it's the knowledge. So it's helping the vehicle learn, but it's all about the data collection.
I'll frame the word a lot, though. Like, you know, I mean,
many.
I mean, Google Street View car. Like, I've seen that vehicle 3 times in my life, right? But I know that it's out there. You know, there are Google Street cars, you know, going out and just mapping. So it's like there are vehicles that are out there, but it's not like, you know, you just sort of start turning your head on I-75 and you're going to see like 7 or 8 vehicles right next to you. Okay. So yeah, it's not zero, but it's not like something that you pop up on every day in your basis here in Detroit.
Okay, but are they safe? I mean, if I'm driving down the street and I see an autonomous vehicle right next to me, which, you know, Tony Cradfield said he saw one the other day. It was right next to him, and he was surprised to see it. And so if I'm that surprised to see it, I mean, will I also be surprised as to whether or not it's going to veer off and hit me or something like that?
That's why you need to validate the technology before you go out on the roadways. That's the key one.
Not me.
Okay. With the millions and billions of miles required, there's really a circle of life here. One requires a lot of simulation work. That's why people are taking a lot of data mining. This is where data is very, very valuable in this space. So you do a lot of the data mining and the analysis from the data, and they can be from vehicles that have been driven. So it's just a case of what happens, the maneuvers, and what happens in vehicles on an everyday basis. Then you can go out into a proving ground in a controlled manner, in a safe and controlled manner and repeatable. And then you go out on the road, because what you don't want is what you just said, Renee, is for that to happen. And even now on the roadways, vehicles, autonomous vehicles aren't allowed on their own. They have to be there with an operator. So it's not the fact is you'll see one on its own, even though some people do recline their seats a great deal so you can't see them, but no, there are people in the vehicles.
At the same time, I was having a conversation with an OEM the other day, and they were saying, you know, because their vehicles literally abide by all the laws, that they were having crashes because, you know, they were stopping at red lights at the right time and having like rear end crashes because that they were working like in a perfect world they should.
Okay.
And people weren't ready for that.
They weren't going through the yellow caution lights.
Exactly,
okay.
yes.
They were stopping, yes, okay. They shouldn't do that.
But that is a real issue, Renee, and I think some of the engineers at Google, although it's a little unusual, they had to reconfigure the software to be a little more aggressive, because it was coming to the stop sign, it would sense that another vehicle would move, so it would stop. And we all know that everyone stops is completely stationary for at least a second before continuing, don't we? So you can understand then this autonomous vehicle will be at that stop sign for about 3 days. Because it was very courteous and it wasn't, so they had to make it a little more aggressive to actually maybe just inch a little forward. And again, we can't condone things like that, but it's the learning function, and that's what it's all about. It's just when you have if full autonomy and everyone's there in 2040, 2050, when the 250 million vehicles we have in the US are now turned over to be fully autonomous, you have to deal with, at the moment, the minority is autonomous vehicles. It may end up being the majority, but there will be a transition, and we have all to deal with it and interact at different junctions and driving patterns.
Mm-hmm. Do you all see, okay, because I imagine we have some questions here in the audience, and so we want to make sure that we entertain your questions as well. How do you see this autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle technology changing all the other modes of transportation? How do you see it being applied? Now, part of the reason why I asked that is I understand, you know, someone was saying, well, United Airlines had better start paying attention because people will decide to start taking autonomous vehicles versus flying American Airlines for short trips. And so it's really going to revolutionize how we're using the airline industry. And can you cite other examples where it might change, or do you even agree with that? But can you cite other instances where it might change the mode of transportation?
I mean, this is just my personal belief, but yeah, I mean, this is the ability to change society, right, and life. Like between this and virtual reality technologies, like you can start taking any scenario of your day and seeing how things could be completely different. Yeah, I mean, not only, so like, and this is just sort of an example, I'm going to build on what you said, but like, so I used to be in Chicago and I was doing work in Fargo. So it was a ridiculously expensive flight and it would just like kill half my day. But it was an 8-hour drive. So if I could have like a sleeper, and this is way in the future, obviously, but like if there was like a sleeper vehicle, right, that I could just sort of pick up and at 10 o'clock at night, get in it, fall asleep in it, wake up in Fargo the next day. I cut out the need for that. I cut out the need for a hotel room, right? So I don't need a whole hotel room. I might just need like a shower or a desk. Like, so I can use like a la carte features of all of that.
Okay, I see that, yeah.
And like, so you start to begin to think of all different businesses and how just simply the way that we've had for the last 100 years has changed things. And I think that you look at something like the smartphone and see how that has impacted businesses beyond just simply like, now I can use my Google Docs on a phone versus a computer, you know, just sort of seeing how that technology has changed the way we live. This technology has the same potential to change the way we live and impact beyond just simply how we design streets and how people get around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion around kind of the change in land use patterns that you might see associated with autonomous vehicles. So, you know, if I can have my fully autonomous vehicle drop me off at work and it no longer needs parking, it can go, you know, do something else, for example. I don't think that those types of shifts are going to happen overnight. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's something that we need to start thinking about and planning for, and at least coming up with some possible scenarios of how the way that people utilize their, you know, personal mode of transportation might change the way that, you know, cities look, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if all we do as a society is replace the drivers with a robot driving the vehicle, and everybody starts moving further out, then we've screwed up badly. And, you know, so that, you know, a lot of these things, and, you know, talking with Colin and then talking with people at our MPO is understanding, like, how this is going to, that we can use a change like this to make improvements. But what we're going to have to do, because there's going to be carrot and sticks. Because just putting more vehicles out, and, you know, if we get to a policy where, like, Colin drops his car off downtown and then he can just send his car home, he's doubled his VMT every single day. And that's a waste of energy, not to mention
VMT?
Yeah, vehicle miles traveled, sorry.
Oh, thank you.
That, you know, there's lots of different scenarios of heaven and hell and sort of what you could begin to do of where this goes. And that's, you know, where we need to start going from a policy standpoint is beginning to think through this. Like, since we have no idea what a vehicle is even going to look like in 2040 or 2050 to, like, say, like, this is exactly how things are going to be, but we have to start thinking about what's important to us. You know, from us in a city, it's, you know, the curb is going to be very important to us from a policy standpoint. And how we use that to promote things that we want to see, like bike lanes, better pedestrian accommodations, encouraging people to not be in single occupancy vehicles. I love people to be in a 40-foot bus, but sometimes it might be, you know, we might have 12 and 14 seat buses as well.
Well, I know I would love to see more, you know, Detroiters in cars and things, but I can only imagine if we have the highest insurance rates in the country now, I can only imagine what's going to happen to those rates when there's nobody behind the wheel driving the car.
Well, I mean, how the insurance industry obviously goes is different as well. But not having to own a vehicle and being able to live in this city without a vehicle is something that we need to make easier. That it's, you know, it should be the most affordable way, but it's not the most convenient way right now. And that's the same thing, you know, this region, it's stamped in your DNA that, you know, you own a vehicle. And for so many, the ability not to own a vehicle limits opportunity from a job standpoint, from a health standpoint, from an education standpoint. So that does obviously have a ton of potential for us from that standpoint. But there's lots of negative ways this can go as well. So it's just beginning to think through all the decisions we're making, and whether it's, you know, what we begin to, you know, an investment in a parking lot, right? That we might have to take a 30-year note on to repay and say, is this really going to be worth what it's worth today in 30 years? So, I mean, all these decisions, we begin to just sort of add this question into our decision-making process, right? Like, if we had a list of what we'd talk about on making a decision, now we just sort of add, what could autonomous vehicles do to this? And not just simply saying, like, we're going to completely change how we make decisions, but it would be insane for us not to have this as something that we're thinking about as we're making decisions, whether it's on infrastructure or policy.
Right. Andrew, did you want to add something to that, or can we go to the floor?
I think there's just, I know there's mobility. I don't want to go down a dark path.
Uh-oh.
Go for it.
But the last statistics from NHTSA were 35,092 people died. Since then, there's roughly about 8% increase in fatalities every year. We just need to look at the road signs from MDOT, and you see deaths are up this year. It's not a sign you want to see. So that's 100 people a day. So what I'd like to do is put the ER doctors out of business, because once you start reducing 100 people, 100 deaths, and then various accidents that come with that, then it's not just about mobility, it's just about life. And it's really, that's what should be promoted through this technology as well. Safety, but also the reduction of fatalities is key. And then if you can do that, and then as Mark is saying, you can then have the infrastructure that then goes with that, then it's a better place, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Okay, great.
I want to add one thing real quick. I think all these kind of things beyond the technology that impact the way this technology may be rolled out in the future. Michigan actually did something recently where they, through law, created this Council on Future Mobility, where they had folks from different industry sectors who are subject matter experts in insurance and the OEMs and, you know, legal and all that wonderful stuff. They've actually come together and developed this council so we can talk about all the laws and regulations that ultimately impact how this technology gets rolled out and how it's done in a safe and kind of smart way, and how those individuals can inform our legislature about the ways that laws need to be changed to make sure that crazy things don't happen, like, you know, too many vehicles out there and all that stuff. So.
Right. Okay, great. Okay. Yes, we have a couple of questions. Warren.
I guess I consider this, what I would say, a two-edged sword. As exciting as this technology is, and obviously where we're going, to me it's just scary. So my question would be, because a lot of this is what I consider now kind of like the closed room conversations. You know, I was talking with the gentleman from Toyota and things that they're doing and the studies they're doing, whatever. I guess my question is, at what point do we start to bring the information to the public so that we can kind of start to educate people of what's going to happen, so that I don't know, just so that it's not as scary and people are not as apprehensive to what is going to be inevitable. You know, you see a lot of the autonomous vehicles now in shuttles that they're doing around on different business campuses and some universities or whatever, and I agree it would be very disheartening or scary if I'm driving down a highway or something, and as you said here, there's a lot of different companies that are testing today on regular roads, and you look and there's nobody in the vehicle, and the vehicle can be in control or whatever, but I would be a little bit
apprehensive.
Yes, if I'm looking and I see a vehicle move beside me, and because I'm looking for a person. So again, to me, the question is, you know, how do we start to prepare the information so that it's not just in, you know, these kinds of forums, but it's getting out to the public that these are the things that's going on, so people are starting to be prepared, you know, to accept what is inevitable. Thank you, Warren.
I think I'd start to say the scariest thing that I saw recently was a person who was reading a book on I-275 while doing 75 miles an hour. She was in the vehicle.
You do?
But that was really scary, and it had nothing to do with autonomy. It just had to do with common sense. And I think there's a lot of, if you look to Europe at the moment, the common sense is coming down in terms of what is being cracked down in terms of with law enforcement, in terms of people who are texting on the phone and distracted driving and relating to insurance and fines, etc. So they're taking it very seriously, far more than we are in the US. But to your point is very valid. If you look at the OEs, the car manufacturers, there are so many terms that are used of different features on the vehicles relating to certain automated features. I mentioned about emergency braking. Every company has a different name for it, but it's the same thing. If you look at ESC, electronic stability control, that's that yellow vehicle with the squiggly lines below it. When it goes off, when you feel the vehicle move slightly, there are 45 different names for that. And that's a standard feature required by law. So if you're going into a dealership saying, I'd like some automated features, and you go to the Cadillac dealer and a Toyota dealer and a Ford dealer, you're going to be more confused than anything else. And it's really, you're quite right, it's educating the public. The surveys, I think, that were carried out recently by AAA, really showed confusion of, I don't know, it was probably 2/3 who are fearful, as you say, about the automated driving, yet 2/3 wanted all of these things were actually automated features. So they didn't want it, but they did want it. So a lot of education is a key element as I see at the moment, and faith in the technology people have right now is too high. That's my view, because they think it's already there. It's not. People can get into a Tesla, they can think they can go to sleep and forget about it. No, you don't. It's eyes on the road, hands on the wheel at all times, because the vehicle can then disengage, and you better be prepared.
So how is it automated if it's eyes on the road and hands on the wheel? How is it automated?
Well, it's got automated features, so it's got sensors on board that are then looking, optical cameras on board, and then know where you are in lane positioning. It's looking ahead and then has the algorithm. So it's looking for you, but I think if you go into YouTube, you can see when the mobile construction zone came up, the car carried on against the lane markings and went straight into the barrels. So again, you have to be prepared. Faith in the technology is not absolute.
Okay.
So I want to.
It's coming, so let's not assume it's there.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
So I do want to add on though, because so I tried to use Snapchat, right? And like I've always been very, very technically savvy. I had no idea what to do, and I said, I'm too old for this. I'm too old for this technology. And when you start to look at the impact, the positive impacts that a technology like autonomous vehicles could have, particularly, you know, we're in a society where more people are getting older and more people are living longer than they ever have in the history of society. And as you get older, it is harder to drive. And that this technology could have great impacts for so many seniors on being able to have a greater life, to be able to get around, because for so many seniors, the challenge is they can't drive, so that they're basically at beckon of public transit or private shuttle services. But that said, like, you know, I can't get my dad in an Uber, let alone like talk about like an autonomous, like he thought I was crazy to take this job. So, you know, and this is kind of like where I bang the drum with the OEMs, where it's like, you know, it's great you guys are doing all this stuff and you want to do these things, but like, we need to talk to people at some point, right? And begin to say, like, what are you nervous about? Like, why? What keeps you from even considering a technology or a service like this to like literally get in a vehicle where there's no driver, right? And say, like, I'm comfortable with that. I'm 85 years old. I've done everything the same way for 85. I have no problem hopping in a vehicle.
And so teach through experience.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, where we're going to have to sort of, you know, be able to bring some of these companies in to help learn. You know, we're going to have to take a very obviously forward and leadership role in this to begin to talk about these technologies, knowing that we have these other mobility challenges. But yeah, you know, just assuming that we're just going to throw a bunch of vehicles in commercial-facing applications and saying that everybody is going to use them immediately is a crazy.
Yeah, and you talked about senior citizens, but I know that, you know, for people who are disabled, they're saying the same thing. It really will allow them to be more mobile with this technology. Colin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add. I think what you're also seeing though is that the OEMs are not jumping toward, you know, just dropping a fully automated vehicle on the, you know, on the dealership lot, you know, tomorrow. You're seeing, you know, day one, now they have lane keeping, and then lane keeping as well as adaptive cruise control and park assist. And I think you're seeing an incremental introduction of automation to ultimately one day you're going to be like, oh, the car drives itself. Well, it just, you were educated all along the kind of spectrum of automation. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
Right. You always have those people who are going to drag themselves into the technology. Yeah, Terrence?
First of all, thanks for coming. My name is Terrence Hicks, and I am the chair of our historically underutilized business subcommittee for COMTO. And the question that I have for you is that although I know you have Tier 1, Tier 2 partners, Denso and Toyota and otherwise, and I think what I'm going to speak to is C2V, I think, and how does a small business whose interest is in procuring, for lack of the formal term, widgets or something that goes into the infrastructure, and they want to be able to provide those widgets to companies that develop these vehicles, how are they privy to what kind of procurement items that they can build upon? And then how do they get the information in a general fashion other than going on the website or other outreach initiatives? The beauty of it is I am from here, but what about companies that are across the nation and they want to be a part of this?
Thank you. Well, we talked about OEMs, so operating equipment manufacturers. So
gosh, that's a tricky one. In terms of every large organization, they're looking with small businesses, and they have a responsibility to do that. And the companies you just mentioned, they also work with them as well. I think a lot of it then says, are these companies focused in the right areas? And there's a lot of confusion at the moment. What is it you need? And that's why some of the technologies right now, there's a lot of startup businesses. You look at the small businesses that have started are huge now, but any of the small businesses at the moment, I think some of the universities are actually having small incubator. And I know this may not be answering directly your question, but they're looking at some small businesses and actually how they can develop them with the technologies and help them. So economic development in the state of Michigan, I know, is alive and well, both in Detroit, in Michigan as well, and then tying these companies together and small startups and actually seeing how they can thrive. So there is a support infrastructure for a lot of these startup companies, but when it comes to small businesses, people are always on the lookout for support in these areas. And I think a lot of companies, they do need to do a lot of soul searching at the moment to say, what do I want to be? If I give you one example, I was with a bearing manufacturer, and they asked me the question, well, so how do I get into connected vehicles? Okay, you make bearings. How am I going to make the leap from bearings to connected vehicles? So we stopped and thought for a minute and said, okay, bearings rotate. When there's issues in wear in different components, they give off different frequencies. When they do that, all of a sudden you can transmit those frequencies. Then it becomes part of maintenance and part of prognostics and diagnostics for vehicle health. So I then made up something on the spot for him and said, you can take your bearing assembly and then develop that with some kind of transmitter device, and then you can actually be part of vehicle diagnostics. And there was silence in the room. And I said, well, that's just 5 minutes worth of free consulting, but I'm sure you can do better than that in a full session. But it's how to do that. And a lot of companies are saying, well, I do metal stamping, so what do I do now? Okay, so what's the technology around there, and how can I adapt? And I think a lot of people, it's the adaptation now of, it's just different. How are we going to evolve from this? Or it's evolution or revolution. But I think if they look in it, it's trying to then think a little more out of the box to go from the bearing manufacturer to be part of vehicle prognostics. It was a huge leap for these people, but they saw it and thought, oh, maybe we should research that. That was just one idea. But this is what I think a lot of smaller companies need to try and do as well, is to say, how do I need to be relevant in this space?
Sounds like a very good topic for another conference, actually. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
My question is for Annie. You were speaking about the different types of technology that they actually have inside of their environment. I was curious if they were going to standardize those things, so that way small business can have the opportunity to participate in that. So if you're saying there's 45 different versions of certain things that go in cars, is there any type of legislation or any thought process to standardize that, to drop that down to maybe 5, so small business can decide what they want to do?
The standards process we're working in at the moment is really starting from the top down. A lot of people aren't really wanting to disclose what's happening with the specific technology, so we're starting really as almost technology agnostic. And we're trying to work on scenarios and outcomes, because you don't need to tell me what kind of vision system you have. If vehicles are having a difficulty with Michigan lefts, they're having difficulty with certain things. So we're developing test standards now for different outcomes and different scenarios, and then we'll be able to cascade. So probably in the next 18 to 24 months, people will feel a little more comfortable starting from that point to get into more standards. And once the more standards are there, then comes a different challenge, because if the cycle for the development cycle for one of these devices is 12 months. You know, September there's a new iPhone. It tends to be around about 30 weeks or so in development time. So a vehicle roughly is 30 to 40 months. I think you all know how long infrastructure takes and how long is it going to be around for. And so a lot of it then relates to the interoperability. So standards are very important, but how all these things are communicating, as Colin and Mark have mentioned as well. But I say more in-depth technical standards in probably about the next 18 to 24 months when people feel a little more comfortable talking about it. Because at the moment it's like a middle school dance. They're going there because they've been told to, but they're not talking to anyone and they're leaving.
Okay. Yes, you are definitely next.
Good morning, and thank you. Great panel, a lot of good information. I lead a mid-sized transit system in Florida, and I continue to get questions from our board. Are you ready? Like, are you ready? And so as I listen to the conversation, many of you have said a horizon of 2040 and 2050. And so I want you to talk a little bit about, you know, kind of being a little clairvoyant on when we think a greater percentage of the demand for autonomous vehicles, we'll actually see them on the road. More than, you know, 0.1%. We're talking like 20% autonomous. When does that start happening? Just take a stab at that date. And in terms of the transit system and the many variables that we have to think about, as you talked about, the human variable, the infrastructure variable, making the vehicle smart to identify all of these. I believe, and I'd like your comment on this, is that you can reduce those variables substantially by starting with the transit system in a bus rapid transit type model where it's dedicated. You have fewer variables to deal with in terms of signaling, in terms of people. In Miami-Dade, there's a 21-mile dedicated bus rapid transit system, which I believe is the longest in the country. And so has there been thought about making that be, you know, kind of the gateway to autonomy? Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys can do the predictions. I'll answer the transit question. All right, go for it. Yeah, so I mean, on the transit end, yeah, I mean, we're trying to think, you know, our early applications will probably be first mile, last mile type solutions, you know, using 8 to 12 person shuttles, like the Navia that's here is was an 8-person shuttle. And you know, it goes 1 to 2 miles, doesn't have the same level of detection that many of the OEM vehicles have, but can just sort of map that 1 to 2 mile route. But yeah, I mean, you're right that there's an opportunity both from a need, right? But also from a business case of why transit and automated vehicles will work. That said, you know, as far as I know, I haven't had any conversation with any bus manufacturers of sort of where they are. You know, a lot of this is being led by OEMs and tier ones. You know, we're just like you, very, very interested in understanding, you know, how this technology will interact with transit. But at the same time, like, I'm very clear that transit is always going to have a very important part of how mobility moves. That regardless, like, putting people in a 40-foot vehicle is the most efficient way to move people around a city or a region, right? Just no matter how small a vehicle can get, it's always going to take up more space. And I ride the bus every day, and when my bus is 10 minutes later than usual, like, that irritates me because time is still valuable to me, even though it's time that I'm not driving. But yeah, I mean, if you have dedicated right-of-way, and you've got the ability to control a lot of the factors that are out there, it makes a lot of sense, right? To say, like, how can we use a technology like this? What we're in, me, you, everyone that's sort of in this space is just trying to understand, like, when are we doing it to actually solve a problem for it, as opposed to just doing something so we have a shiny object and we can pat ourselves on the back on. And that's, you know, what we're really trying to say is, like, when do we get to a point where this really makes sense for us to implement from a standpoint of that this is going to solve a problem?
Yeah, so I'll let Andy take the when they'll be available from full automation, but from an infrastructure perspective, that's actually one of the areas where we see investing in the infrastructure from a vehicle to infrastructure perspective could have the biggest value. Is focusing on locations where, for example, if we deploy the technology at a signalized intersection to allow us to do transit signal priority or preemption, it gives us the opportunity to then focus on, really increasing the reliability of a service that really requires the infrastructure to work in concert with the transit services. So, I mean, a lot of times, if you look at, if the reliability is poor from a transit perspective, it could potentially be the infrastructure's fault, right? So we're looking at ways that we can implement the technology early on, specifically to focus on, things like transit to support those operations. But then in the future, when more connected vehicles start to enter into the system, they can take advantage of that infrastructure investment. So it's definitely one of the things that we're focusing on or talking about in Southeast Michigan in particular.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think that a lot of transit work has been very siloed, right? Like a transit agency saying, like, we're going to go do transit signal priority, as opposed to saying, like, beginning to understand, like, how a connected environment would work and how transit could take a lot of different advantages from it, from from being able to do transit signal priority in a much more affordable number, to providing better information to our riders, to providing things like free Wi-Fi that can be developed through a free mesh network. So there's a lot of really big advantages that I think we've only sort of begun to scrape at around connected.
We got to get Andrew to that. We got to get that prediction.
Oh, you can put the number out.
And the number is? There's two elements here. One, there's the evolutionary elements to it, so the automated braking, adaptive cruise control, a lot of other things that really are just being introduced and will be introduced over the next few years. What you can get with a Mercedes S-Class at the moment will then be cascaded down to a C-Class over the next few years, which is normal for these technology cascades. So if you're then looking level 3 vehicles, in terms of different levels of automation above from where a Tesla is at the moment, in the next 2 to 3 years, that will be, a lot of companies will have that introduced. But I think what you're then referring to is level 4 and 5, which is take the pedals away, take the steering wheel away, full autonomy. And what's really been discussed at the moment is, and there's a gentleman, UC Berkeley, Steve Schladover, and his quote I thought was tremendous. He said, the first deployment of full autonomous vehicles, you're going to be very underwhelmed. I said, well, why is that? He said, because the first full autonomy will be done will be carried out really in a downtown environment. It will be a fleet, a small fleet that's managed primarily maybe by an OEM, or it's a fleet, probably be an EV as well. So you can manage the state of charge, and they'll be mapping specific routes that vehicle will be going on in the downtown area, and they will take that and they will learn, because this is a complete safety critical situation where passengers will get in the vehicle and want to get to the other end where they want to be in a closed environment and do it safely. And so really that's going to be starting around about 2021 with small fleets. Again, that's the sort of small percentage that you said. And then you're probably looking thereafter, probably the next 10 years or so after that. So it's 2030 to 2040, a distance away, until you'll get full vehicles and it will be really accepted. So that's my prediction at the moment. It will evolve in the next 2 to 3 years into level 3. After that, 2021 with very small managed fleets of full autonomous vehicles in a very closely managed environment, which will be mapped on a daily basis. So again, to take any safety issues and concerns out the mix altogether, and then full autonomy thereafter. But as I said, 250 million vehicles in the US. We sell 15 to 16 million vehicles per year are sold. So you can do the math to say, well, how long is it going to take to shift over 250 million vehicles? a long time.
Right, with the average person owning their car, I understand, for about 11 years.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, we're going to tweet out your prediction, and we should say Andrew Smart said that, right? Okay.
That's right, but if you lose money on the stock market, it's not my fault.
Okay, very good. How are we doing on time? I know we're supposed to end at about 10:15. How are we doing on time? I got 5 minutes, and this I'm going to move some questions to this side of the room. If you'll go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Maxine Pryor. I am the chapter president for Colorado, and I'm also the co-chair for the National City Intern Program. About a month ago, I posed a similar question to my DOT, the chief engineer, concerning small business involvement. And so I have a two-part question. One is, how can we get small businesses involved now? Similar to what Terrence was asking. Sorry, I wrote it down because I didn't want to miss anything. How can they connect with developers, possibly play a role? What will your outreach efforts look like? And when will that education piece begin? And then also, what is the message and outreach to youth about this career path?
Okay, that's going to take about 5 minutes. Okay.
So from an infrastructure perspective and some of the opportunities we have within MDOT for small businesses to take advantage of some of the things we've invested in, there's a number of test beds that are existing in Southeast Michigan, for example, today, where they're public, they're open. If someone wants to test and start to see if they can develop a technology to take advantage of that vehicle to infrastructure type of communication, it's there. We have data that's available. From the kind of outreach and education perspective, I know within the state of Michigan, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation looked at how do we talk about all of the things that are happening within the state that are kind of happening behind closed doors that ultimately need to be brought to light to allow for connections to start to take shape. And so within Michigan, there was this Planet M kind of campaign that was developed, similar to when you see the Pure Michigan campaigns for traveler, kind of tourism within the state of Michigan. Planet M is around kind of these connected, autonomous, mobile or mobility types of technologies. So I guess my answer is it's about, talking about what opportunities exist and making those connections the best you can. And I know within the state of Michigan, we're trying to do our best to allow for the ecosystem to grow at all levels, regardless of if you're a large tier one or OEM tier one all the way down to a small kind of startup.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's a good question, and it sounds like that may be a good topic for our upcoming DBE conference, for example, and bring people in to talk about this topic and to connect people, because that's really where it's all going to happen, is the connections and the conversations. I think we are going to have to bring this session to a close, and I think our speakers are certainly going to be. I know we got questions over here too. One more. Take this one. Yes, Warren. Okay, we'll take this one.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Roosevelt Bradley, and I have a manufacturing company. And these vehicles will travel a lot of miles. And what are you doing to make sure that the air and the tires are regulated so you never have a flat tire or a blowout in the tire? Watch that question now.
You're a first. I've been asked some really bizarre, wild and wacky questions relating to autonomous vehicles, but I've never been asked about tire blowouts.
From a safety standpoint.
Oh no, absolutely. Obviously,
thank you.
You can have at the moment run flat technology. You can look at certain tire wheel combinations at the moment. The people are developing tires and wheels where in fact you don't need air in the tires whatsoever. So you actually have the rubber that's actually encapsulating the wheel, but it's the wheel actually then provides the suspension component to it, as tires do just now. So I'm not saying this is being developed in conjunction with automated technology. This is just wheel and tire technology. But you have tire pressure sensing at the moment. People actually need to learn how to put air in tires because that's a lost art, I find. But I think it's the later technologies that you'll find that you do not need to do that. You'll have maintenance-free wheels and tires.
Well, we have engineered a part.
But now, before you go there, excuse me, before you go there, What I'd like to do, if you can ask that offline, okay? You can tell them all about your company offline, because I would like to ask one final question of the panel, and that is, we have people out here who are representing transportation companies around the country, agencies, they're policymakers, they're in touch with both large and small businesses, and so how can they prepare their agencies, their companies, for what's ahead? And what would you like these policymakers to understand about this technology so that they can get on board with what some of these standards are and these requirements?
Well, I mean, I think that we all have really busy days, right? Like, whatever we do right now, like your day is pretty much filled up, and then just sort of adding on something new, it's just like, that's another thing. But like this is honestly going to change everything. And whether it's you, whether it's your staff, investing in just sort of beginning to better understand how all of the things, and whether it's a technology part, whether it's the policy piece, of really starting to do your due diligence, and being able to say, how do I get prepared for this? And do I need to be prepared tomorrow? Do I need to be prepared in 10 years and 20 years? So I used to work in consulting, and 2+ years ago, like, we were talking about this, and there was no business for this. Like, we saw it happening, and there was no business, and now there's business to just sort of begin to talk about autonomous vehicles from a planning standpoint. And it's necessary to start to, if you want to say, like, we want to be in this, like, it's going to take to whether it's coming to cities and states and saying, like, how can we help? What can we do to learn? But it's an investment, because it's just like we're learning and we're investing as agencies. It's what it's going to take as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Mark hit the nail on the head. Become educated, learn about the technology. Look at others that have already kind of beaten the path and that are on the bleeding edge and have had lessons learned, and try and apply those best practices if you were looking to invest in some of the technology. I would say if you're looking to get into this space, make sure that it's there to serve a purpose and it's going to solve a problem, not just for technology's sake. So, too many times, you see folks looking at technologies and it's the shiny object syndrome. It's like, focus on how to apply the technology to serve a purpose. I know that's the big piece in the DOT space is what's the value. So right. Become educated.
Okay.
I'm going to be consistent because the only word is education, and it's focused education. Because if we have focused education on the areas, we have an academic consortium, both community colleges and universities coming together, so we can then speak to industry, understand what the industry needs are going to be, so therefore the education can be developed exactly what's going to be happening over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So, but a clear key is education.
Okay, very good. I understand the American Center for Mobility is doing a lot in terms of bringing various groups together to work on those standards, and your website is probably one source for education in terms of what's going on in the community out there. You want to give that address?
It is acmwillowrun.org, where you can find out what's happening. We're in the midst of construction at the moment. We, as Renee said, we're very much convening. We aren't here developing the curriculum, but we're actually bringing the parties together with industry, and that's the key element at the moment for both standards and for education. So again, acmwillowrun.org. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything, another website or other ways to contact MDOT?
Yeah, so I would say the MEDC's Planet M website is a really good resource for folks to understand what's happening in Michigan. And then
Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
Correct.
Okay.
So if you just did a Google search of Planet M, it'll be the first thing that comes up. And then from a Michigan DOT perspective, if you Google M.ITS or connected vehicles, you can learn about some of the things we're doing there.
Okay, Planet M. So M stand for MDOT or mobility? What is it?
I think it's Michigan Mobility, it's
okay.
everything.
Okay. What about you, Mark? Is there any place You guys containing any source of
like
information?
my Twitter profile. Like,
okay, no, doesn't count.
We're not on the scale of these guys yet,
okay.
so
okay.
It's much more, just sort of texting me.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for setting the stage for not only what is happening, but also what is to come. Thank you all very much for being our speakers today. I think they did a great job. And I would like to say, I know that Captain Kirk said that space was the final frontier. Certainly autonomous and connected vehicles are the next frontier. We're very happy that you were able to put that all in perspective for us. I'd like to thank everyone out here for coming and joining us on this panel. There's lots of programs and events today, and I hope that you look forward to them and will attend as many of them as you possibly can. Thank you very much for attending, and if you care to, our speakers will be here to answer any of your additional questions, especially about your products that you have. Thank you very much.